really happy to be with you and discuss the second phase of this cohort, simulations and role plays that spark conversation. Brought to you again by the Constitutional Rights Foundation, home of amazing resources to help you be the best teacher you can be and achieve maximum success in your classroom. Again, the focus here, like last time with the civil conversations, we haven't really moved far from it. It is that conversation piece. Regina and I were talking prior to the seminar or the webinar going live here, and we were talking about our biggest goals that we have for our students in the classroom. And Regina, let me ask you again, what are some of your thoughts on your overall hopes for the students that you teach?
I think we share this, but we really want to create lifelong learners, to grow students that are very confident in their views and their knowledge, and they're able to express them well to others. And both of these strategies really hone in on that.
Yeah, that's what the things that you said were really kind of like skills. It wasn't specific content necessarily, but skills that you hope they have. And why we like this approach so much is that these role play and simulations offer the students an opportunity to utilize skills that, of course, carry over to many different fields. This is something that we harped on over and over again with the civil conversation as well. And if you're truly being effective as a teacher, you're doing a little more than just teaching content, aren't you? I know as a civics teacher,
I think we're all laughing at that, right?
I prided myself for a long time as a civics teacher to get my kids to learn lists of vocabulary. And I felt that they could command these lists of vocabulary and regurgitate them at ease, but I had this nagging feeling that within 6 months, most of that understanding was lost. It wasn't really meaningful. And I found that after doing many different role plays and simulations, and then even stringing them together into large-scale simulations, my students do far more than just learn vocabulary. And Regina and I's hope right now is to help maybe encourage you to use this same approach that at first might seem a little risky when it comes to time, right? You got a lot of important resource there that you don't want to lose, but also there's a fear of failure. Sometimes taking approaches like this don't end spectacular first go. So we hope to encourage you to try something that maybe you already are good at and just refine it, or try an approach that maybe you're not necessarily accustomed to, with an understanding that it is okay to fail forward, but just to keep trying.
Exactly, Ben. Experience is the best teacher. And both of these strategies create experiences for the kids and really help them remember things long term.
That's it, long term. This active learning approach hopefully encourages that long-term learning. Well, hopefully everyone has come in and joined us so far, so we're going to go ahead and move forward by actually taking a look backward. We are going to take stock of just how far we've come. If you think about the civil conversation webinar that you experienced, and hopefully the successful civil conversations you've had in your class, you've now equipped yourself with much more tools in that overall toolbox of yours to be effective teachers. And I hope those experiences went well, but the ingredients that made those experiences go so well are also present in the role play / simulation approach. So the individual ingredients in the overall recipe are the same, and we're going to highlight those for you again as we move forward. But just take a moment to appreciate what you've already done, maybe try a lesson that you otherwise would not have done if not prompted by this opportunity that we have being part of this cohort. So we appreciate, being part of this because it's encouraging people to maybe do things or refine things that they've already, had some experience with. Why do simulations and role plays work so well for kids? I know that for me personally, when I experience something, I learn it better. If I experience something and then turn around and try to teach somebody else about it or share that information, then I really committed to long-term learning. But basically what these role plays amount to, is experiential learning, or what we refer to as active learning, right? So it's learning by doing. And what's great about this is if students experience things that they otherwise wouldn't have opportunities to in a safe environment, they get to explore different point of views. And when they take on different point of views, it often becomes easier to recognize or appreciate other people's point of views. So this is something I think that goes really well with the simple conversation approach. When you can really put yourself in other people's perspective, it also leads, more times than not, to understanding. This is high engagement. This captures those kids that like to be moving around, that like to, think outside of a textbook, And as we mentioned earlier, one of the reasons that we like this approach so much is the high retention, the fact that this leads to long-term learning. The biggest thing that I like about it is you can use role play and simulation to teach concepts that are normally very abstract, that are hard to visualize. If I wanted to, teach a student what a desk was, I could point at their desk and now they know what it is. But I can't point to something like the economy. I can't point at something like that's an economy and they understand what that is. So role plays and simulations help you build these concepts into tangible things that they participate in. It helps them understand and visualize in a much greater capacity. So that leads to the depth and higher order thinking to navigate through these opportunities. When you do it well, all the content that you're teaching is working together with these simulations for that key thing we want, synthesis. When all of these components that you painstakingly organize, or just go to the Constitutional Rights Foundation and use their shovel-ready resources, help create synthesis.
You know what this really is the 3 R's. They talked about this is rigor.
Rigor, right.
Okay, and they're high-level synthesis learning. They're evaluating, they're analyzing, they're experiencing. They're working on relationships, the civ cons, as well as when they have discussions with their classmates and they get into their role. And it's also very relevant to them. It's giving them that experience, that takeaway. And with civ cons, you're choosing relevant articles to them so that they can connect with it.
Yeah, and it can be rigorous, but the students don't always recognize that, do they?
They think it's play.
They forget that they're learning as much as they are, oftentimes. Definitely. We also want to point out that this approach is encouraged by Common Core standards. Whether you teach in middle school or high school, Common Core encourages the use of these skills. Again, we're moving away from simple content, but utilizing skills that translate across domains. So Common Core encourages using this type of approach just as we do. But the ingredients for success, regardless of what kind of role play or simulation you use in your classroom, there are some key ingredients that are constant. One, you want to obviously consider the dynamics of your classroom. No one knows your classroom better than you, and you know what's appropriate and what's not. You know just how much you can encourage and push your students and have them excel beyond what they thought capable of. But we do want to reflect on the implications and ramifications of immersing our students in certain situations. So again, that goes back to knowing your own class dynamics. Outside of that, there really is just a simple model that captures students and helps you achieve success in this type of approach. One is you have to start with a good inquiry. You have to start with a good question or issue or topic that often has built-in contention, meaning it could be adversarial, one side versus the other. We use role plays and simulations that don't have a clear understanding of what was necessarily right and wrong, or what was done or what wasn't. The kids get to act out and live and put themselves in those perspectives. This, of course, can only be done if you provide proper context. So our job as educator is to make sure that our students have the basic level of context to really appreciate these types of role play and simulations. Of course, that's where we're delivering our content. And of course, you have the simulation itself, where the kids actively participate in whatever approach you're using. Finally, and most importantly, at the end of the experience, at the end of the simulation, coming together as a class and debriefing and having the conversation and discussion about what just occurred, about what they just experienced. Then you try to create connections to things that you've already taught them and that they know outside of class. And that debrief and making those connections, that guarantees that long-term learning that we've been talking about. So the ingredients are easy. They're present not just in simulations and role plays, but also that civil conversation model. Now, that's pretty much the end of our cheerleading section, and hoping that you adopt with vigor this type of approach. But we wanted to move on and show you a couple examples. Now, obviously, since we're not all together face-to-face, it's difficult to actively participate in this ourselves. We wanted to show you some simple approaches that we used with success. And at the end, we'll point you to where you can find some excellent sources from the Constitutional Rights Foundation. Now, I'm going to let Regina take over for this first one. These are some things that she's done in her world history class about the French Revolution.
Yes, I teach 7th graders, so we're going to show you a middle school, how I put it into my classroom, and then Ben is going to show you how he's using it in the high school in an American history format. So we're trying to give you kind of both ways. So we're going to start off with the inquiry question. So this is actually my question for the whole unit. All through the unit, we're doing activities that come back to this question. How do choices affect fate and conflict? So the first thing that we're going to start off with is the actual plan. So we're going to start with that, and we'll just kind of walk you through that. Bear with us for a second while we pull that up. So what I've done is I've taken kind of a general plan, and then I have made some comments on there for you. Okay, it's not popping up. Hold on a second. We're going to continue to work on that, because if you can't see the plan, that'll be a little harder.
Yeah, it's not showing.
All right, Laura, she says open new share.
If you open new share, you should be able to select that.
Okay. We're working on that for just a second, folks. Thank you. All right, we are up. Okay, so at the top I have the inquiry question to start off with. And so the students actually they start with a card. We've done some introductory. This is kind of towards the end of our French Revolution unit. You can use role plays and simulations, in my opinion, anywhere in the entire product. You can use it as an intro, you can use it during. This happens to be kind of an end product. So we've already studied the French Revolution. They've done some readings on it. We've done several primary sources where they've looked at that.
You use journals a lot, right, too?
Well, this particularly is a journal. So they're going to actually get a card with a name on it. Most of the names are fictional people that I've just made up French names that go along with it, but several are actually real people from the French Revolution that they've actually read about in our text. So they're going to write a point of view journal entry on their person, how their person feels about taxes, the revolution in general, and their everyday life activities. Okay. So they take on that role, that first person role. They're going to be writing in first person, and I will tell you, it is amazing some of the detail that you get out of the students. The real students, the real roles, they actually look at Encyclopedia Britannica to do a little bit of reading. The one reason I like Encyclopedia Britannica, it has the 3 levels of reading. So if they're a struggling reader, they can choose the lower level. If they're a higher reader, they can choose the level 3. So it gives it to them on 3 different levels that helps them attack it at their rate. So I know lots of times we talk about differentiation for reading, but that's one way. So they're going to respond on these 3 ideas. We will post this on there's a generalized version, not with the extra comments, but there's a generalized version that is already on the CRF files. When you go to CRF and there's that whole section on files, it's actually already there. So I'll actually upload this so you can actually get to the rubrics and the other items. We're not going to be able to see all the items here, but there's a rubric attached to it already. They can age the paper. They use first person. They add locations. I encourage them to name drop. We talk about what that is. And then there's a text I give them where they can actually look at which estate they're in. Want to make sure that they know which estate they're in before they leave the classroom that first round. So then they go home. They've got a couple of days where they're working on that journal entry at their own rate. The next class they come back in, they have their journal entry, kind of a diary. There's multiple parts to that diary, and they have a discussion. Before we move on, I want to actually show you a student. Now, Ben and I, we've done these activities. Ben's is a little bit more recent. Mine was back a couple of weeks ago. And so when we started to put this together, all of this is retrospective. No, we need to go to the article first. And so this is a little bit retrospective, so I've had to kind of pull up students' items later. This is just a student that happened to send one to me. It was not the strongest, but it was not the weakest. So yeah, if you'll scan up just a little bit here. All right, so this is his entry. You can notice he's using first person. but he's actually putting in a great deal of detail. He's talking about storming the Bastille, right there in the July 4th. I don't know if you can see it. They can see that. The July 14th, 1789. This is actually a journal entry of Jean-Paul Marat. And so he's talking about this. He's done that research, the student has. Talking about the royal family and actually the women's mob that walks down to Versailles and gets King Louis to give some concessions. So he has that in there as well.
So you feel using these journals and putting them in first-person perspective really helps prep them for the role play itself, and it helps build the content understanding?
Yes. So this is the role play. They've taken on, and then we have a simulation at the end.
Right. I'm sorry for the simulation.
Right. So this really helps prepare them. So, and I love kind of the color he puts into it. They say that the mob was mostly women, a baby on their hips, and using pitchforks. I'd like to have seen such a thing. He goes on to talk about Versailles and how it's 13 football fields long. That was a specific detail from one of the readings that we did. He talks about himself specifically in 1790, and at the end, Jean-Paul Marat actually is not killed by the guillotine, but he's killed by another member. And he actually goes through and talks about that, and even to the point that he talks about taking medicinal baths, which Jean-Paul Marat did. So he's really done a great job researching this to get some authenticity.
And it was obvious, too, that he had done that. So this is like a assessment in a way, informal assessment, just by you going through and...
Yes, I do use this as an assessment, and he was able to really show the two factions as well, the Girondins and the Montagnard. So,
and you said there was a video you wanted to show them, correct?
Yes. Now so that was the first part, create the journal entry. The second part, they come back together and they actually discuss the activity. Now, we had a snow day earlier this week. We actually came to school and we were here for about 30 minutes, and then they had to actually leave and come back. So I had a couple of game students that are not even usually in class together, that they were just holding in my room. You can look out the window and see all the white snow. And so we were waiting for the buses to come back, and so they're discussing this. I didn't catch the real discussions that we did in class, but this is just a minute or so that you see them introducing themselves, and they're talking about some different, some of the different parts. I do want to point out a couple of things to you, just to make sure that you hear them and see them, because the videos, the audio is not great. So they introduce themselves as the three estates. The first girl on the left is a member of the third estate, and which it means that she is a bourgeoisie or a peasant. I think she's taken on the role of a peasant. She's shaking hands in the middle left. That is Marie Antoinette. On the right-hand side, that is Cardinal. He's a cardinal, so a member of the first estate. And then there is a member of the second estate that's in the Burgundy on the right-hand side. And so there's some different things that they say that I'm not sure that you'll catch on to, but they do talk about the guillotine. The girl in the Burgundy talks about immigrating at the end. She was able to survive the guillotine because she immigrated to England. Marie Antoinette talks about eating cake. In the second estate, the girl in the blue shirt refers to the fact that she was a duke's brother as a cardinal, and so that's how she'd actually met the girl from the second estate before in the Burgundy. So they really understood kind of the relationships between these characters, which really means that they understood the point of view, which is the point of the role play. So we're going to play this for a few seconds, and then we'll come back.
Good. I am Madame Dupont of the Third Estate.
I'm Marie Antoinette.
I'm Cardinal Dupont of the First Estate. And I'm Lady Bellefonte of the Second Estate.
I remember you. We used to play together when we were younger.
Anyway, we need bread.
You see cake.
We don't have that either. I remember you from the Versailles. When we marched to the Versailles, I saw you peeking out because when we were harassing your husband.
I don't know what to say.
Typical student reasons how you use it.
Okay. Well, I'm just glad I do not have to pay any taxes.
Me too.
So we have to pay all the taxes. You guys should help us out.
Again, that's a third estate problem.
Well, it's gonna become a second and first estate problem once we come with the guillotine.
What's the guillotine?
The guillotine is a device that cuts people's head off, and we're gonna use it.
No, thank you. I think I will pass.
I will be going to the United Kingdom over there. Well, we'll find you.
Look at that.
Again, realize this was not the real conversation that they had in class. They were humoring me and trying to put something together very quickly on a snow day. So the discussion, and you can actually arrange the discussion as whole group, where you're heterogeneous, really grouping like this, or you could actually do homogeneous, where all third estate is together, all first estate is together, and second estate. The last thing I want to show you is a little bit of the simulation at the end. So they find out whether or not they got to visit Madame Guillotine or not. I randomly kind of pick names unless they're a real person. Obviously, we know if they're a real person, what happened. They've read several firsthand accounts of people that actually witnessed the executions, and one of those actually talks about the callousness of the members of the Revolutionary Party, the Jacobins, and how they treated the aristocrats after they killed them. And they was like, yep, the aristocrats, who cares if their blood's in the street? Let the dogs lick it up. So we actually make a reference to there. I use and this is actually on the lesson plan, but I use a sound Bible where they actually play the sounds. And so the first sound that you're going to hear is a guillotine sound with blood spurting. Now,
Oh, no. They remember that one, don't they?
Yes. Oh, they do forever. So realize that these are middle school students and they major in grossness. They really enjoy that type of activity. So we're just going to show you a couple. So the first young man actually brings a quote with him. So when he gets called up, he actually brings a quote and kind of says a quote. He addresses the audience. The second person is Jean-Paul Marat, different young man than the one that actually wrote the journal entry. And so he talks a little bit about being murdered by Charlotte Corday. All right, we're going to watch.
To say,
Show the head to my people. It is worth the trouble.
show the head. So that's an actual quote that he used. Okay?
Pay attention.
All right. So next, yes, you have to actually take yourself away now. We're not letting the dogs lick everything up.
Ew, that's disgusting.
All right. So hands for you. He's, all right. So hands for you. All right. So next.
All right.
They didn't get to see Jean-Paul Marat, but you get the idea. So, but Jean-Paul Marat actually talks about Charlotte Corday coming up and murdering him, and so he's not guillotined, and we have a knife sound for him because he was nice. So they really get into it. They actually want to be killed. They fight to be killed, and they're a little bit disappointed when they can't be in the guillotine line, interestingly enough. So putting all that together, that shows you both a role play and a simulation, middle school style.
Middle school style. I understand. All right, moving on, we're going to experience the model with something that we do in high school. I teach this to my civics classes, and I've also done this type of role play in history as well, because I make references to, let's say, like a particular case, a court case, and like I say something like the appeals process. And many of my students who have not had civics yet, it goes right over their head. So I like using this moot court example of a role play because it helps, again, bring something that's often abstract to life and makes it more concrete in the minds of my students. So we're going to watch a video on my students participating in a moot court, which is a trial that happened, well, a case that happens at the appeals level. In this case, it's the Supreme Court. And It is about California versus Greenwood. I'll let the video explain a little bit more detail about that.
But let's imagine for a second that due process didn't really exist. Imagine that you hear news of a new law passed that when accused of a crime, the enforcement agencies have more power to find, catch, and prosecute people accused. Of course, to prosecute means to actually try to get them convicted and found guilty in court. Imagine, for example, as part of this new law, that people who work for the post office could actually physically open up your mail and read it. Now, I know today when we understand things like the NSA and how private companies retain much of our data, it doesn't seem all new. But imagine if even like postal employees could physically open up your envelopes and look at your stuff. That might help us find criminals, catch bad guys. But it would also be worse if you had police and soldiers just be able to kick down your door and search your house. It might be easier to catch criminals, but that's not necessarily a country that we all want to find ourselves living in. This new law that we're talking about allows you to be searched even if you just look suspicious. So you don't need to have any real probable cause. You just look suspicious so they can stop you and search you. Would this make it easier to catch criminals? Definitely. But it might be considered an invasion of what? Privacy. Your privacy. So from now on, Americans who look like they've been breaking a law, not that have actually broken a law, but look like they've maybe been breaking a law, they're treated as if they're guilty, and they have to prove themselves innocent. So if you're accused, you're guilty. It's your job to find all the evidence to prove that you are not guilty. One judge is going to decide whether or not you are guilty. The decision is final, so you don't have any appeals process whatsoever, and there's no lawyers that can help you. Since the judge is deciding, we don't need a jury either. Now, if you heard news of this kind of law, you might react like this really cool font in this picture right here, right? Boo! You guys say that every time I give you an assignment, so I understand what those sound effects are like.
In the next phase of the role play, I spend some time providing context for the students, making sure that they understand the implications of due process. And I highlight particular amendments as shown in the PowerPoint here provided by the Constitutional Rights Foundation. We discussed the Fourth Amendment and its implications for privacy, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, and the Eighth Amendment. The whole task here is designed to make sure that students understand due process, and this helps them navigate through the nuances of the particular case itself. Students won't really appreciate what's at stake here if they don't understand due process, and particularly the Fourth Amendment with its implications for privacy.
Given a speedy public jury trial, as well as due process. The Fifth Amendment explains due process. It includes these 5 protections.
Students will care a little bit more about the case if they have reason to understand how they could possibly be affected. Here we're going over how everybody throws away some things that perhaps they wouldn't want others to see. This is an important component of the California versus Greenwood case that is the subject of our moot court. So after going over some examples and getting a few laughs out of it, students are reminded that they are throwing away things on a regular basis they assume to remain private. I go over the historical background and some further context of the California versus Greenwood case. The PowerPoint leads us through the appeals process that had occurred, as well as going over some specific evidence and rationale that was used to argue the case. As we speed through the next portion here, we can see that there's a lot of detail covered. Students were asked to jot down a few notes concerning the case particulars so that they would be armed with information to help better their arguments or questions as justices. I'll go over some of that information now. So in 1984, Billy Greenwood was arrested in California on felony narcotics charges. He was tried in Superior Court and convicted. The police had collected most of the evidence against Greenwood from dark green plastic trash bags, the kind you can't see through. Greenwood had left the bags out for the trash collector. They sat on the curb in front of his house. The police did not have a search warrant, but they did get permission from the trash collector to look through Greenwood's trash bags. Under the Fourth Amendment, to conduct a search, police need probable cause, or a reason to suspect that a person has committed a crime, consent, or permission from the person or property owner, or a search warrant. The police had none of these. Greenwood's lawyers appealed his conviction. They argued that the police had no right to search the trash bags. Therefore, the evidence from the trash bags should not have been admitted at the trial. Both sides presented oral arguments and briefs to the appeals courts. Attorneys for the state of California presented this argument: that police did not conduct a search as defined by law. A search is a governmental intrusion into something in which a person has a reasonable expectation of privacy. Greenwood had thrown away the evidence. He had no reasonable expectation of privacy. Trash bags left on the curb for the trash collector. Therefore, the police did not conduct a search. Greenwood's lawyers presented this argument to the appeals court: Greenwood did have a reasonable expectation of privacy of these bags. Therefore, the police did conduct a search, which they had no right to do. Now that students have been provided some context about the case, they are left for the most exciting part of the simulation, taking an active role in becoming court justices or attorneys defending or prosecuting Greenwood. Let's listen in as I explain these roles.
You're going to create arguments that try to convince the justices that there was a reasonable expectation to privacy, that the trash bag should not have been searched. Of course, the attorneys for the state of California are going to argue the opposite, create arguments for Greenwood that Greenwood had no reasonable expectation to privacy, and that the bags could be searched legally. Those of you who are the justices, you're going to come up with 3 questions to ask each team of lawyers. You're going to ask clarifying questions, perhaps. You're going to try to basically ask them to justify why they believe what they do. You're going to decide who will present your case out of the team of lawyers. You both can, or one person can. You're going to explain to the justices what you decided as a group and why. And that will be the actual moot court taking place. Next. So, rules for oral argument. The attorneys for the state of California are going to present first on why they felt that there was no search and why there was no reasonable expectation to privacy. Then Greenwood's attorneys are going to present and explain why it was a search and why there was a reasonable expectation to privacy. The justices can ask questions for both sides at any moment. So although we're strict on who presents in what order and not letting the other side talk during those presentations, when it comes to the justices, they can stop anybody at any point and ask any questions. But we will have a set time limit, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, and they're asking questions in between, and I'll count that as the minutes when they ask. The justices then make a decision. After those oral arguments are presented, the justices meet and discuss the case. They then vote and decide whether or not they agree with the attorneys for Greenwood or the attorneys for the state of California.
Now, this is only a portion of my class. We're actually doing this during lunch. If this was an entire class, we would be broken up into separate courts. This is not an activity that the entire class participates in one giant trial. In fact, they are in small groups, and at the end of the simulation come together as a class, and each of the individual mini courts report out on what their arguments were and what decisions the justices ultimately made.
Where did they
But
search?
But you also have to think of the opposite end, because if you throw away something, are you technically giving up possession of it because you're trying to get rid of it?
Exactly.
Do you give up possession
Does
of
that
it?
forfeit it as your
So
property?
you guys don't want to be next to each other though.
And where was the bag searched? Was it searched
On the curb, or was it searched on the
trying to figure out.
Because if it was searched on his
Was it
property,
searched?
that
Was
could
there
be
a
in favor of
reasonable
Greenwood. But if it was
expectation?
taken back to wherever they collected, like actually collected,
Because then by
it
then,
could also be
But
considered public
because
property.
There was no reasonable
did
expectation.
he not say that it was also the police asked the trash collectors to search it before they?
You guys got 5 minutes.
I want to know if there was a
Alright, so I guess first we gotta talk about how the trash bags are technically not private property once you put them out. So that's one.
He went to the store and he bought non-see-through trash bags for no reason. So people couldn't look at them because he expected privacy.
But it's still his property because it's on the curb, and until the trash people collect it, that's when it should be their property. I don't think they had a right to search it because it's still on his curb.
I want to know if the company
Like, do they have? Is it written on paper that they're like agreement
that they will
with the-
keep the trash?
Yeah. That's a big question. Are they contractually obliged to keep it private? Do they have to?
So let me get away from the podium. Anyway, so the trash is private property once taken out and left out on the street. At that point, it is actually the trash company's property, since he's leaving it out to give it to the trash company, and gave it to them willingly, leaving it out on the street. Even the everyday person could have looked through it at any point in time, threw it because it is left out in the street willingly, as in he threw it out there, and it's trash companies, and they went through the trash company to search it, and since it's the trash company's property, it was legal, and there's no problems with it.
Question.
Yes.
What probable cause did they have to search it? Like, what was their reasoning for searching?
They don't have to have a problem. It was consent of the trash company.
Today I would argue to you, the judges, that there's an expectation of privacy held in our trash. And what we throw away is still our property because it is on our property and is also contained in bags that we purchase with our own money. And also, whenever we take this out, it is not leaving our property until the trash company comes.
There's holes in the story that keep us from making a solid conclusion. And I was wondering if we could say what choice we would make based on what the evidence showed us.
Just go by the evidence that has been presented to you and disregard any other hypothetical evidence that may or may not exist.
Okay. Well, I mean, the trash.
This is really just a case of like who owned it. Yeah, whose property was it at the time of the search?
In our moot court, the justices decided in a very similar way to the actual Supreme Court. They agreed with the opinion written by Justice Byron White, who said, "Plastic garbage bags left at the side of a public street are readily accessible to animals, children, scavengers, snoops, and other members of the public. Moreover, Greenwood placed refuse for the express purpose of giving it to the trash collector. Greenwood could have no reasonable expectation of privacy in the items discarded." This approach of using simulations and roleplay seems to flip the classroom on its head. Instead of being a fountain of knowledge and actively disseminating information to the students, they are more actively involved. I'm not in front of the room lecturing the entire time. In fact, I am challenging students, offering them opportunities that they might not normally have. They take ownership of their own learning, and the measure of success is great. Students' feedback is amazing. They understand and grasp the material in more nuanced ways, and it allows them to express ideas that they have about the learning, and we go down avenues that otherwise would have remained unexplored. All of this is only achieved with fruitful discussion at the end of the lesson. After all, the most important component of these role play and simulations is the full class discussion that is elicited from participating in these events. Important for all of us will be the discussion that's held on our online discussion forum for you and your colleagues. It's the same place that the curriculum library can be found, where many great resources from the Constitutional Rights Foundation are archived.
So the big thing that I like about this lesson is that it really makes the students understand, again, an abstract idea of the appeals process. Students begin to see, because they experience, what it means to go through the different levels of court and how an appeals trial is very different than a district trial with a jury involved. They have an interest to further pursue these types of topics. They get more and more excited knowing that other role-play simulations are on the horizon. And as you can see, these kids voluntarily gave up their lunch to participate because I offered this as extra credit, and they wanted to participate in it. So I really like how they were willing to be engaged, and they were very vocal leaving the room and how much they enjoyed this particular one, but that's not exactly unique. Now I do want to turn it over to Laura, who is going to walk you through again where to find some of these resources. And again, thank you for listening to Regina and I. It's been a pleasure helping maybe motivate those of us who are interested in trying these approaches and pointing the way to find great resources from the Constitutional Rights Foundation.
Hi, so this is Laura, and with me is Sarah. Hi. And we're just going to go over quickly where you can find these resources, as well as the online discussion board. And it's kind of some next steps before we issue at the end of the process the stipends and certificates. So this is the Constitutional Rights Foundation website. It's www.crf-usa.org. You can click on if you go to the bottom right-hand side where it says Teacher to Teacher Collab, click on that box. You see the three boxes, it's the third box. Click on that. And this is where you'll see the curriculum library, the calendar of events, and the discussion boards, as well as additional lessons and professional development. So we'll post this video under this professional development tab. If you haven't yet seen the civil conversation, you can watch one of these videos to get some PD on how to do a civil conversation. And then you'll find the materials in the curriculum library. So let me go back to that. The curriculum library. You want to talk about that, Sarah?
Sure. So at the top of the page are the civil conversations, texts that CRF has created for those, and sources that we can recommend that work well for a civil conversation. But for this part of since we're in the second learning cycle now, you'll just scroll down a little bit to the role plays and simulations, and then you can take a look. We've got them broken down by roughly by content area. There is some overlap among the cases or activities that may work for some for different subjects. But one thing I want to just mention here is that this I would encourage you to explore all of this content areas regardless of what you're teaching, just to kind of see the full range of topics that are covered in these role plays and simulations.
You've got kids. Use the same format.
You can feel free to be creative.
Finn, I think your microphone is on. You can mute your microphone.
You have a specific role. You're involved in this conversation. This is your thing.
So what I was saying was that you'll see a real wide range of topics and themes that are covered by the cases and activities that are listed under the role plays and simulations. And I would encourage you here to feel free to be creative about picking up on those themes and bringing them into your classroom. Just to give you an example, one of our California teachers who teaches 6th grade had participated in our face-to-face training here at CRF. We did the Greenwood moot court that Ben just showed us right now. And then she actually took that back and used that with her 6th graders in the context of a unit on the Middle Ages and the medieval period, where she had already been studying law and the emergence of concepts of common law and the rule of law. And so she kind of spun off from that topic, which fit in with her 6th grade content standards, but then brought it up to this more current example of ways in which societies continue to struggle with the meanings and interpretations of the law. So yeah, feel free to be creative and get creative for how things might tap into themes that you're dealing with.
And if you're looking for the specific moot courts we just did, again, curriculum library under government and economics, and then go down to the bottom there, and you'll see some different moot court activities that you could do with your students. So the last section I want to take you real quickly to is, let's see, let's go back. We're going to go to, let's see here. Where's the
cohort?
No.
Oh no. The main
Sorry
portal.
about that. We're going to the main.
Go to the main portal on the left.
Okay, great. And this is where you'll be able to see the two discussions. I know some of you are our online cohort, so meaning that you have not gone to a face-to-face and you're just somewhere throughout the nation and you're participating in this program online. This is your portal to do the discussion.
And that'll take you to PowerSchool, where many of you have already been participating. There have been some really great conversations on the discussion boards about using the civil conversation and how that has gone for folks. So
you simply click
on. You just click on discussion. That one, yeah. And this will take you to the discussion board.
And I see Jean has already posted. Thank you, Jean.
Yeah. And there's some really thoughtful conversations going on there, really from teachers across the country. So please do log in. If you have any trouble, if you haven't been able to log into PowerSchool yet, just let me know. Sarah at crf-usa.org. And I'll be happy to help you with that. And for those of you, some people had been concerned that there had been a deadline for when to post on the civil conversation, but I know people are still trying to get those posts up and still working on it in their classroom. So don't worry, that discussion board is going to be open for a while. But if you're ready to jump in with a role play and simulation, that discussion board I think opens tonight or tomorrow morning. So that's for the online cohort.
So if you are in a face-to-face, meaning that you are in a cohort somewhere in California or Florida or North Carolina where you've met with a teacher leader, you'll be participating in a discussion here, which is your in-person cohort. It's through Canvas. If you have any problems, please let us know. But you go to the course, you click on discussions, and then you'll see there's only one discussion. Even though there's a bunch of things here, there's a civil conversation discussion and a role play. So click on the role play discussion. You'll see the prompts here. What are the successes, challenges? What would you do different next time, etc. So that's where you'll participate in your discussions. So, anything else?
I think the only other thing we just wanted to mention was to let folks know about next steps and sort of where we go from here. Basically, now that we're in the second learning cycle working on role plays and simulations, we can't wait to hear how it goes when you try it out in your classes, and let us know on the discussion boards. And then we'll kind of come back together with teachers from across the country who have been in in-person and online cohorts on May 31st for our final program wrap-up webinar, after which time we will we'll ask you to fill out a quick survey and issue stipends and certificates of participation.
Exactly. So that's it for us. If you have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and unmute Ben here. If you have any questions about the strategy or about the next steps in this process, please go ahead and use that chat section, and we'll see if we can answer any questions you might have. All right, I don't see any questions. Thank you. Again, this concludes the webinar, unless Ben and Regina or Ava, if you guys had anything else that you'd like to share.
Well, actually, I guess there's one thing that we did want to mention. Earlier, we had said that we kind of prided ourselves at being good at like teaching vocabulary lists and feeling like our students were learning a lot. But I wanted to point out that as we move more towards these active learning approaches, I know with me personally, my students' success measured by standardized tests even, I know like that's not something that we really always concerned about too much. It's not like I teach with that goal in mind, but my students have been doing even better on traditional assessments that you wouldn't really think would be reflected with these role play simulation type activities. It really makes me think that students are gaining a little bit more of an in-depth understanding and cultivating skills that are even translating to these assessments. So if you're worried about, you know, oh, I got to spend time worrying about this test coming up, don't think that this is robbing your students of better test scores. I find the exact opposite to be true. Thanks everyone for participating.
Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.